All right, so we're back. We're in this video going to talk about the journal article submission process, which can be long and unnecessarily mysterious. And there's lots of sort of steps and processes and things that are oftentimes unclear, especially if people have don't have a lot of experience publishing in academic venues like journals. So we're going to get into that process really clearly. And again, as I mentioned in an earlier video, I come to this as somebody both with a lot of experience as an author submitting to academic journals, but also as a frequent reviewer of manuscripts, and then also as an editor of 2 academic journals. And so I sort of see it from these different perspectives at the same time, and I'll try and include those different perspectives in the discussion here as we get through the process. So previously we had already, in the last video, we talked about preparing manuscripts, and now we're sort of beyond, we have this prepared manuscript, and now we're ready to go through the journal submission process. All right, and then a few comments that won't make it into this video, I'll put in the very next one on 6 more suggestions on publishing of how to be successful in getting your work out there into academic venues. Okay, so you've got, following up on the last video, you've got your perfectly crafted manuscript. It's beautiful. All the ideas are there. The data are analyzed, the discussion, the literature review tie into each other nicely. Everything is beautiful and academic sounding and written very clearly and well, and you've had people read it and everything. Next step is you've chosen the right venue. You've chosen the academic journal where you want to submit this particular paper. And by the way, most of the examples I'm going to give have to do with submitting to academic journals. You want to make sure the paper is perfectly formatted, of course proofread, and also blinded if required. So in terms of formatting, in my own field, for example, most journals follow the American Psychological Association, the APA guidelines, the 6th edition of the APA. That's sort of standard in my field. Lots of different journals, though, are different, and some have their own requirements. They'll say APA except for these things. Whatever it is, don't look at published articles. Look at the author submission guidelines, which will be on the journal's website, and make sure you follow those guidelines to a T. It makes everybody's job easier, and it's really frustrating, actually, and editors seem to be annoyed, I think disproportionately so, but a little bit annoyed when authors don't follow the guidelines. So make sure you follow the guidelines perfectly. Of course, make sure it's proofread perfectly. There should be no typos or anything in there. And then it might have to, as part of the guidelines, the paper might or might not have to be blinded. In terms of, by blinded we mean removing any reference to your own work or to your institution. So, but check it out. Some journals require that, some journals don't. The ones that do, all you have to do there is simply replace any reference to your own work with the word author or with XXX or something like that, both in in-text citations and in the references. Same would apply to references to your institution. Just to be safe, if it does require full blinding, you might want to remove the name of your institution just so it's completely blind. All right, that would apply to any authors of the paper. Then, once you get the paper all formatted and blinded if necessary, ready to go, you're going to submit. Most journals accept submissions through some kind of online submission platform. In the case of a lot of the journals that I work with, it's a platform called Scholar One, but again, you go to the journal's website and it'll give you directions on where and how to submit a manuscript. When you do that, you'll probably have to create like an online account, and then there'll be a place to upload the paper. Sometimes you have to move tables to new files or figures to new files or to the end of the manuscript. Again, follow the instructions on the website very closely. And then as you do that, you'll also have an opportunity most of the time to submit along with the manuscript a brief cover letter. And so I'm going to show here an example of a cover letter I think is a really good example of what to include. And I want to emphasize that it should be brief. So we'll see here. This is the cover letter. This is submitted to one of the journals that I work with. And it says, "Dear Dr. Gass and Dr. Van Patten." I'll just highlight a couple. I'll read it here so we can read along. "We are writing to submit our manuscript, establishing evidence of learning in semi-artificial language learning experiments as a squib to studies in second language acquisition. The manuscript is not in submission or published anywhere else. Our paper reviews and critiques 3 common methods for establishing baselines against which learning is assessed in artificial language learning studies. In particular, we make explicit how the tacit assumptions of each method lead to threats to validity." Let's see. Because the use of semi-artificial language methodologies is on the rise in SLA, we believe, second language acquisition, we believe this paper will be timely and of interest to the audience of SSLA. Thank you for your time and consideration. We look forward to hearing from you. Best, and then the authors. Okay, so I want to highlight a couple components that you want to include in a cover letter. First of all, it's important to mention, and sometimes online submission systems actually have a box that you tick to affirm this, but that the paper is not currently in consideration elsewhere. In most academic disciplines, it's not appropriate to have a paper under consideration in multiple journals at the same time. And so a lot of journals want you just to affirm that as you submit it. It's just a matter of efficiency that multiple journals aren't devoting their time and resources, reviewer time and energy towards reviewing a paper simultaneously in multiple journals. That's simply considered inappropriate. In some fields that is appropriate, but generally that's not the case. So you want to indicate that somewhere. You want to indicate somewhere just a sentence or two about the study. No need to provide a whole abstract. The abstract is already in the paper, probably also submitted somewhere in the online submission system. Just a couple words on what the study is trying to do, or the paper. And then finally, maybe mention why you think this paper is a good fit for the journal. Because as we'll talk about in a minute, one of the first jobs of the editor is going to be to figure that out, to figure out whether they think it's within the scope of the journal and it's a good fit for the journal. And so if there's anything you can say very briefly to help convince or persuade the editors that your manuscript is a good fit for the journal, you can mention that in the cover letter. Okay, no need to go into the whole backstory of how you got interested in this topic. If you want to say anything personal, you could do so, but I would do so very, very briefly. So you don't need to give a big backstory or talk about why it would be such an honor to have the paper accepted into the journal. It's clear that you want to have the paper accepted into the journal. You don't need to talk about it in the cover letter. Okay, so next steps. So the very first thing then, once the paper gets submitted, breathe a sigh of relief. The paper is out there. It's in the hands of the editor, okay? So what's going to happen then? The editor or editors, maybe editorial assistants as well, are going to check out the paper. And what they're going to be looking for is to determine whether or not they think that the paper fits the scope of the journal. So if depending on, and this is up to you and making sure you've done your research to know the actual scope of that journal, but and they want to see, okay, is this appropriate to the journal? They want to know, does it seem reasonably rigorous? Does it seem, does it possibly have publication potential? And if an editor looks at your paper and it hits those, ticks those three boxes, I think then there's a good chance that you're going to go, the paper's going to go out for peer review. Okay, and that's what we're hoping for. That's what we're hoping for. So if they don't think that's the case, you'll get what's called desk or editorial rejection. And just know that desk or editorial rejection, this is the sort of triage that happens when papers come in, because journals often receive way more submissions than they could possibly accept or they can consider for publication, much less accept from publication. So in the two journals that I work with, the majority of the papers that come in that are initially submitted are desk rejected, or they're rejected at the editorial level before going out for peer review. Okay, so lots and lots of papers get rejected simply right there. That's okay. As an author, I find it hard to receive a desk rejection. It's really disappointing, but at the same time, it can also be in a way more efficient for everybody, because if a journal is inevitably going to reject a paper anyway, I'd rather know that after a week than after 3 or 4 months. I'd rather find that out as soon as possible. So then you take the paper, revise a little bit, figure out where to go next with it, reformat if necessary, submit to another journal as soon as possible, if that's the case. But it may also go on to peer review, and that's what we're hoping for. We're hoping that it doesn't get caught at the desk rejection, that the paper makes it through that first hurdle and goes out for peer review. Okay, so what happens after that? The peer review process. Okay, so as this comic sort of illustrates, the peer review process can be painful. You may ask yourself, why me? Why do I put myself through this? And it is really difficult and uncomfortable and challenging and even sometimes hurtful. But truly, even though it is all those things, I appreciate it. I'm so thankful for the time and the energy and the effort and the expertise that reviewers and editors give to my work when I submit to journals. And so even though it's hurtful, sometimes, not always, I don't want to make it out to be worse than it is, but even though it can be really challenging, it's something that I massively appreciate. because they take the time, all volunteer, they take the time to read and provide really, really close feedback and comments on papers. And they're not doing it they're not giving critical or harsh comments because they enjoy it for the sake of being harsh, but rather because they're trying to improve your paper. So that's an important thing to remember, is that the comments come in, they can be hard to take, but they're trying to improve the paper so that we can move forward the field, whatever field you're in, most efficiently and effectively and accurately. So peer review, one question that often comes up in terms of when your paper's out for peer review is how long does it take? And the important thing here is it varies a lot. If you think about what all needs to happen before you get a response from the editor after peer review. So let's say it takes, you give the editorial office, the editors, and maybe the editor's assistants 1 week to look at a paper to decide, more or less. If it takes them a week to look at the paper to decide whether it's going to go out for peer review at all, it might take another week or two to find 2 or 3 or 4 reviewers that will accept the invitation to review the manuscript. So we're already at 2 weeks, let's say. And then different journals allow different periods of time for reviewers to review the manuscripts. Some are, in my field, some are short, like only about a month. Just this morning I was asked to review a manuscript, and they said, please get us your comments within 6 weeks. So if you say the 2 weeks to do the in-house review, then to find another week to find reviewers, and then another, let's say 6 weeks, we're already at 2 months. And then the editors need to take in all the comments from the reviewers and make a decision based on what's going to be the next step, if it's going to be rejected or what's going to happen with it. And so so then you're already getting close to 3 months. And so it's not abnormal in, say, education or in applied linguistics for a review to take about 3 months. I would say don't worry about it. Don't dwell on it. Work on something else. You should always have multiple papers in the pipeline, sort of staggering your projects and your manuscripts. So one paper's out of review. Don't think about it too much. Work on something else. If it gets to 4 or 5 months that it's been in review, then I usually like to follow up. And I had this just this last week. It had been a little over 4 months since we'd heard from the editor on a particular manuscript. And so I asked my co-author, hey, what do you think about following up with the editor? And then she went ahead and contacted the editor, and the editor said, thanks so much for getting in touch. I'm sorry about this. I'll take this as a reminder to get in touch with the reviewer and say the third reviewer hadn't submitted his or her comments. And I'll see if I can gently remind them and get them to submit their comments so we can move on and make a decision on this manuscript. So and I've had that with other papers as well, where after maybe 4 or 5 months, different people have different thresholds for how long they're willing to wait and be patient. Other cases where the bootstrapping paper I mentioned in the previous lecture, where we also had to follow up and ended up working out really well. So what does it look like? So the editors I mentioned will contact 2 or 3 or 4 experts in the area, possibly very likely people that you cite in your paper. They'll then provide comments to the editor, and the bottom line of their comments are, they provide detailed thoughts, comments, suggestions on how to improve the paper. And the bottom line is whether they think the paper should, what the editor should do, because they're trying to inform the editor's decision. So the editor reads those reviewers' comments and then makes essentially one of 2 decisions, possibly reject. Excuse me. So here's an example of a extract from a rejection letter I received. Thank you for your manuscript, and then manuscript ID number, which you submitted to the Modern Language Journal. And the editor is writing to me and says, I pondered quite some time over the study because it has certain interesting aspects, but in the end, I decided it was not substantial or innovative enough to qualify for publication in the MLJ. Let me try and give some reasons. And then he provided some reasons for me and my co-author to consider as to why the paper was going to be rejected. That's fine. The paper did end up getting accepted and published in another journal, which is great, but rejection happens. Okay? Or it's rejected. The other option is that the paper gets revised and resubmit. That's good news. It's not going to get, papers very, very rarely get accepted upon initial review. Almost inevitably, a paper gets submitted and then you get a revise and resubmit. And that's what we're hoping for. That means that it's a really good sign, because that means that the editor thinks that the comments from the reviewers, there's a good chance that you can address those comments and improve the paper to a publishable quality. And so that's what we're hoping for. It's also a great opportunity to improve your work. And so I really, really cherish those comments from reviewers and editors, and the opportunity to revise and resubmit a paper for further consideration in the journal. And then we're going to do that. And we'll talk about how we do that in a minute. But and so here's a response letter from an editor that I received that was considered major revision. So the editor says, "Thank you for submitting your manuscript to Language Learning and Technology. The reviewers have favorable comments about your manuscript, but they also describe a number of problematic areas. We would therefore like to ask you to revise your article. We cannot guarantee publication, but a good number of revised articles are eventually published. We ask that you pay particular attention to the following." And then they list out, they highlight some of the points from the reviewers' comments that they found most pertinent or most important for us to pay attention to in our revised manuscript. Okay, and that's great. It really helps you focus your efforts in the review process. So on rejection, I want to say a few ways to approach it in a healthy way. First of all, expect it. It happens. Of course, you're hoping for acceptance, but expect that some rejection is going to happen. Not every time, but it will happen, and that's okay. Grow thick skin. Sometimes the comments will be harsh. Some reviewers are going to take advantage of their anonymity and be a little bit more critical than they might be if they weren't, if you knew who they were. So don't take it too personally. I know we put our heart and soul into our work, but don't take it too personally. You simply want to write and take those comments and think of it as it pertains to your work, not to you personally. Remember that everyone gets rejected. The scholars that you most respect and admire, they get their work rejected sometimes as well. Okay, so you're in very good company if your work's getting rejected. And then also remember that very good papers get rejected too. I've had editors tell me that they have really, really excellent papers, but they sometimes just can't accept as many good papers as they don't have space in their journals for all the good papers. And so even very good papers sometimes get rejected. Further considerations for handling rejection. Remember that there are lots of different reasons. So the first part was kind of like those, how to handle it emotionally, rationally. And then just remember also that there's lots of different reasons papers get rejected. It could be that reviewers or editors have a different theoretical or methodological stance or foundation than you that misaligns with your view or your approach. And that's okay, but that might prompt them to reject a paper. You might have findings that contradict those of your reviewers. You may be critiquing other studies in your paper, and the reviewers may be those same authors that you're critiquing, whose work you're critiquing. It could be that a particular journal, you might have a great article, a great manuscript, a great study, but it could be that that particular journal that you submitted to has published too many studies in that area recently, and so they want to diversify a little bit. That could also, you could argue, that could also be a reason to submit to that journal based on the grounds that there's been a lot of studies published on that same topic there. So that could kind of go either way. It's also possible that the editor might not know your area well enough, and so might misjudge your paper at first sight. That can happen. They may, as they're making those editorial in-house desk rejection type decisions, they may not know the area, may not know that the paper is the quality that it is. It's possible. And then it may just be that your paper is better suited to a different journal. That paper that I referred to there of mine had to go through 2 or 3 journals before it was eventually published. And I think that it wasn't the best fit for those other journals. And I'm glad that it ended up getting accepted where it did in the end, because it wasn't the best fit for where we initially submitted. And if it is initially rejected, you can also take heart knowing that papers that get rejected upon initial submission, but then are eventually published in other journals, achieve greater impact and are cited more often. So that's a little bit encouraging to know that papers that are rejected initially end up being cited more often than papers that don't. And my understanding of that is, or my explanation for that is that most likely when a paper gets rejected initially, it receives all those comments. from those reviewers and editors, and then it's improved. And then when it goes through another journal, it receives another round of comments and it improves even further. And so by the time it gets published, after going through 2 or more rounds of reviews, it's really, really polished and a really strong paper, and it's able to make a better contribution to the academic discipline that it's being published in. So back to the process, repeat steps 2 through 4, right? So cover letter, editorial review, peer review. If it's rejected on step 1, go back and repeat steps 2 through 4 until it's accepted. If it's rejected, go back to step 1. Right? At each resubmission, thank the editors, thank the reviewers, and then you want to, this is really important, provide an itemized response to all comments. You're going to receive sometimes pages and pages of comments from the reviewers and editors and suggestions for improving the manuscript. Now, you want to, first of all, you want to do a couple things there. You want to make sure that you pay really close attention to those comments. One, because, again, these folks take their time voluntarily to help you out on the paper because they want to make the paper better. They're not being critical for the sake of being critical or to be hurtful. They're trying to make the paper stronger to make a more useful contribution to the field. And so you want to pay really close attention, revising the manuscript according to all those comments. In addition, you want to resubmit with the paper another document, a separate document that lists all the changes you made in response to all the comments. And so this would be like a response document. And the way I do it is I'll take all the comments from the editor and the reviewers, put them in a new file, and then below each one, respond to it. Thank them for the comment, talk about what you did in the manuscript to address the comment. If you don't make some changes, that's okay. You might disagree. You might have a really good reason for not making one of the changes that's being suggested, but you have to explain it. You have to justify the reason. You have to explain the reason for not making that change that they suggested. And always being polite and thorough and treating that like something that's going to be reviewed very closely, because it is. This is a really important step to, 1, show that you care and you appreciate the comments, 2, to improve your paper, and 3, to make sure that they know that you paid attention to their suggestions. It also makes their job easier along the way if you can show item by item every single issue that they raised, how you addressed every single one. It makes their job, as they're trying to decide whether or not you addressed the critiques that they raised, it makes their job easier in determining and seeing that you really did address them really thoroughly. So here's an example. Comment from reviewer 1. They wrote on page 19, indicate how inter-rater reliability was calculated and the index of inter-rater reliability. I don't think that a percentage agreement is adequate. So too, you should explain in some detail for which items there were discrepancies. Then my response to that comment. In addition to the simple percentage agreement indicated as such by the percentage symbol, we have added another more conservative estimate of inter-reliability, Cohen's kappa, which was measured to be relatively high at 0.87. Because there was relatively consistent agreement, i.e. no specifically problematic items, and for the sake of space, we have not gone into more details regarding the small number of disagreements between raters. So we show how we addressed the comment, what we did to address it. We didn't do everything that they asked for, but we explained why we didn't. Okay, then once finally the paper, after sometimes 2 or 3 or even 4 rounds of revisions and resubmissions, the paper is accepted. Hopefully, celebrate, savor the moment, and then add the paper as forthcoming or in press on your CV. Tell your friends, take yourself out to dinner, do something fun to enjoy that, okay? Because it's a lot of work to get through that process, sometimes years of work off and on to get a paper to that point. But really make sure that you enjoy that and you celebrate it in some meaningful and appropriate way. And then get back to writing, right? Make sure you're always working. So once the one paper is accepted, you're already on to the next paper. So make sure you enjoy that moment, but then now use that to bolster you and push you towards the next project. Okay, so that's it for the journal submission process. Next up, we'll get into 6 more suggestions for successful publishing in academia. So I will stop there and I'll see you in the next video.